We are just by our engagement hub, which is called the Dovetail. We were the lead consultants and planning consultants for a planning application for the regeneration of the whole estate, looking at comprehensively at the whole place, and working with a big team of architects and consultants to pull it all together. The architects are Proctor Matthews and Metworks, working in collaboration, so they've each focused on different areas, but very much working as part of a team. LDA are doing the landscape. So it's called the Carpenters Estate because it was owned by the company of Carpenters, and still is in part of it, and actually still has a legacy of that on the estate. So the Building Crafts College is still located here and is still a really important stakeholder, and actually we've really tried to think about how we can involve them in the process and try and make sure that building crafts and the way that they use materials and develop things can be carried on into the redevelopment, so trying to sort of keep that character of building and making, and encourage those skills are still learnt here. It's a sort of classic post-war estate, so it's got 3 big slab blocks that very much dominate the sort of views, or would have done even more when there wasn't so much development around here, and then very low-rise housing that has a classic problem of confused fronts and backs, poor overlooking of spaces, the routes are not legible, it's very easy to get lost walking around. So we have spent a lot of time kind of looking at what could be retained, what couldn't. Some of the lower level buildings are being retained because they are good quality and well used and well liked. I think people, because they've been trying to regenerate the estate for a long time, there are a lot of empty homes here because they don't want to fill them. So there are empty homes in there, and I think there's a kind of misconception between trying to empty the estate out to knock it all down, but actually it's more complicated than that. As part of the resident engagement process, we have ended up with a whole range of residential typologies because that's what residents were after, and it's one of those things that I mentioned earlier, so not dismissing residents' views about buildings that we perhaps think are not good quality. So the taller buildings, actually residents are quite keen on them. They represent a really important part of the Carpenters' identity, and they were keen to see bits of them retained, and that's what we've tried to do. They also wanted to have a mixture of lower rise buildings as well, and to very much retain the house typology. So we've got parts of the estate which have lower rise development and a more sort of traditional form of housing. So we've really tried to think about it in terms of different characters and different areas on the estate to try and match those resident expectations. One of the really important things here is the landscape and pulling it all together. There's a fairly large existing central space at the moment, but it is a real benefit to have that there. And one of the key things we've wanted to do through the master plan is to retain a big central open space. So the key sort of set piece of the master plan really is this nice central square that's overlooked by housing, and it's really kind of meant to be the heart of Carpenters. And then there are other spaces around as well, but that are kind of subservient to that more central space. And we've really thought carefully about how all of those spaces link up and how you move around. It's in quite an interesting juxtaposition between the Olympic Park, the stadium, Stratford and the new station entrance, the high street, and actually really trying to think about what those desire lines are and how you manage visitors to the area and people that live here using the same streets and spaces. So we've thought about that very carefully. So this is James Riley Point, which is one of the existing tower blocks on the estate. So this is being retained as part of the master plan, but it's being stripped back to the structure and then completely replanned inside so that the units will now meet new London plan standards. They're all getting balconies, so it will look at like a completely different building, but actually it's the same structure and just rethought. So it's been quite complex. And then at the ground floor, there's going to be a community centre sort of wrapped around that existing structure, which helps to negotiate the levels and will replace the community centre that's elsewhere in the master plan. This is where a lot of the existing businesses are, and there's quite a lot of quite interesting businesses that evolved over time, and the types that inhabit these kind of ex-industrial buildings, and a big part of the master plan is actually trying to retain some of those businesses. So in addition to the 2,000 approximately new homes, there's also 10,000 square metres of non-residential space and lots of sort of classy space designed at retaining some of these businesses. So this is the central focus of the estate in terms of the open spaces. It's where residents gather. It's not in the best condition and not the best quality at the moment, but it still is an important functional space for residents, and it was really important that we retained that, thinking about how it would work in a variety of ways and for multi-generational purposes as well. We've submitted planning for the outline application, which is the majority of the master plan. We're hoping that it will go to committee in the next few months. We're just in the final stages of negotiating with LLDC and closing out the comments and things on that application. James Riley Point has planning permission because that was done as a separate detailed phase so that it could come forward more quickly and form part of the decant strategy for the master plan. Just working through the final details of a contract with the contractor and hoping that will get on site pretty soon. The application is being put together by Populo Living, which is Newham's private housing company, and we're obviously in the London Legacy Development Corporation planning area. So we, in terms of planning, they're the planning authority, although we are in the phase of LLDC winding down, so we also need to think about Newham because once we've got through the outline permission, we'll then be needing to do reserve matters, which will likely go to Newham as planning authority. So this is the new entrance to Stratford station, which has been a big part of the master plan and the thinking behind the movement strategy. At the moment it's quite cut off and it's quite difficult to get to, or it can feel quite difficult to get to, even though it does actually have quite good connections, and obviously this is going to dramatically change that with its own entrance. And one of the issues the residents raised during the design process was how to deal with match day fans, so West Ham fans coming in, which causes various issues with some antisocial behaviour and just lots and lots of people coming through that don't necessarily live here or kind of dwell here. And so one of the things that we've thought really carefully about is how to try and manage that. We're not going to get rid of it because you can't, but just thinking about on match days how that might work. So one of the key things is looking at the route that they would take from the station to the stadium, which would be down this road, and so trying to be able to try and sort of funnel people, and then also thinking in the future about a match day management strategy, and there's the ability to sort of manage crowds and try and sort of not get them into the more residential focused parts and quieter parts of the estate to try and sort of deal with that issue.